Long before it became a professional sport, rowing originated as a method of transport and warfare. Boat races are known to have been held in medieval Venice, but it wasn't until the 18th century that our modern conception of competitive rowing first emerged. The sport achieved an initial peak of popularity in England, where formal races were staged on large rivers between professional watermen, essentially taxi drivers for waterborne transport, with wagers laid and spectators gathering to cheer on their favourite crews. In light of these origins, it may come as no surprise that a waterman's wife, Ann Glanville, would, in the 1830s, become one of modern history's first nationally recognised sportswomen. Born and raised in the bustling Cornish port town of Saltash in southwest England, Anne was one of the more remarkable physical specimens of her day, standing 6 feet tall and possessing hands larger than those of most men. Yet, despite her imposing physique, she was far from a sporting prodigy. By the time she embarked upon her rowing career in earnest, she was already in her mid-30s and had borne her husband 14 children. Upon his death, Anne maintained the family business, supporting her brood of children on a waterwoman's wages. By the early 1830s, however, paddle steamers and large-scale bridge construction had begun threatening Saltash's thriving river trade. Many watermen, out of desperation, increasingly sought to supplement their incomes racing in local regattas, at which the winning team could receive as much as £4, the equivalent of almost £600 today. Anne quickly began involving herself in such races, and in 1833 formed her own all-female foursome, who were soon taking part in local regattas, bedecked in white caps and matching dresses. In their first recorded competitive outing, they finished in second place, but before long they had developed into one of the nation's finest crews of either sex, competing all over England and even across the Channel at the port of Le Havre on the French coast. Such was their success that Anne and her crew were able to make a tidy living for themselves rowing professionally, as wealthy patrons sponsored their participation on the competitive circuit, enabling them to demonstrate their expertise to astonished onlookers, whilst hustling those gamblers unfamiliar with their prowess, whose natural inclination was to bet heavily against them. The extent of their sporting celebrity is readily apparent in contemporary press coverage of their performances. Their victory at the Sutton Pool Regatta in 1839, for example, was described in glowing terms that indicated just how respected they had become in elite rowing circles. As the Plymouth, Devonport and Stonehouse Herald reported, the Saltash ladies, as usual, created the greatest attraction, and Ann Glanville, the heroine of 1,000 races, came in victorious in the principal gig race. The style in which these water nymphs managed their boats was greatly admired. They were enthusiastically cheered by the spectators, afloat and ashore. As their fame spread, Anne proved herself thoroughly adept at self-promotion. By all accounts a raconteur of the first order, she fed the press outlandish tales of her crew's exploits, which have only been debunked in recent years. She claimed, for instance, to have been presented to Queen Victoria at the Royal Yacht Club, and even exaggerated the circumstances of her crew's victory over male opposition at Le Havre, claiming falsely that they had vanquished 10 different crews of Frenchmen in a single day. Yet, in the grander scheme of her sporting career, Anne's embellishments served an important purpose. She and her crew relied upon their well-to-do patrons for travel expenses and boat repairs, and her braggadocious style served to reinforce their standing in the rowing community, in an era when fact-checking was obviously much more difficult than it is today. It is abundantly clear, moreover, that tall tales aside, they genuinely were amongst the finest crews of either sex in the entire country. They were even memorialised for posterity at the height of their fame, in their white caps and matching dresses, in an early 1840s oil painting, The Wet Dock, Ipswich, by the East Anglian artist Claude Nursey. The explanatory text accompanying the painting describing them anonymously as a visiting crew of women from the south coast who had travelled to Ipswich to take on all comers. Anne's last recorded competitive race took place in 1847 when she was 51, although she continued rowing for work and recreational purposes for a long time thereafter, and in her old age even developed the amusing habit of rowing in circles around the giant warships docked in the harbour at Saltash, bantering with the sailors on board. Indeed, such was her national celebrity that Queen Victoria's two eldest sons, the Prince of Wales and the Duke of Edinburgh, invited her to dine with them when they visited Cornwall in 1879, and, upon Anne's death the following year, her funeral was paid for by Lord Beresford, the future Vice-Admiral of the Royal Navy, and attended by a packed congregation of rowing fans from all over England. Ann Glanville and her all-female crew made their reputations a full 2 generations before modern women's competitive sport became accepted practice in Great Britain. Nonetheless, their numerous victories demonstrated that women could row a boat as efficiently as men and that spectators would pay for the privilege of watching. In this regard, they unequivocally helped lay the foundations for the subsequent growth of women's rowing as a modern competitive sport. If you enjoyed this content, I'd recommend checking out my new book, Hollywood's Women of Action, From the Perils of Pauline to Wonder Woman, which examines the development of the action heroine as a character from the silent screen era to the present day. It's available from Amazon and other international booksellers. To purchase, follow the link in the description below. And if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like, comment and subscribe.